Hello and welcome to Unraveled. I'm Marvi Sirmed, and tonight we will discuss one of the most enduring and complex conflicts in South Asia, the relationship between Pakistan and India. And we will explore this in light of the recent survey report released last week in Delhi by the public policy think tank Center for Policy Research. The survey was conducted, however, in 2022 by CPR in partnership with the polling agency C-Voter. This survey report offers some interesting numbers indicating the perceptions of people from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh about peace between Pakistan and India, among various other things. Joining me tonight to unpack the findings is someone who has been at the forefront of reporting and analysis of India's foreign policy, especially the intricate dynamics of South Asian geopolitics. Suhasini Haider, National and Diplomatic Affairs Editor at The Hindu, one of India's most respected journalists. Suhasini, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to Unraveled.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marvi, for having me on, and I'm glad we can at least speak this way.
Absolutely. There's no visa on Zoom, thankfully. So Hasni, what do you think are the key factors contributing to this pervasive, I understand that there's a, in the light of what you have reported in The Hindu about the survey report, there exists a certain kind of pessimism among the people about the future of India-Pakistan ties. What do you think are the key factors? What are the findings first, and then what are the key factors contributing to this pessimism?
Marvi, just to start with, as you pointed out, this is a survey done by the Center for Policy Research along with the C-Voter group that does a lot of different surveys in India. And they didn't just look at the attitudes of people dealing with each other. There were between, I think, 75 to 135 questions asked to the respondents. With Pakistan, they could only do one wave because in 2022, there were the floods. So one wave of questioning, but they went back to some of the Indian and Bangladeshi respondents more than once. So they had all these questions. The questions were about how do you feel about yourselves? How do you feel about your economy? How do you feel about your politics? How do you feel about your politicians? Authoritarianism in the subcontinent, the role of religion in the subcontinent. So one of the chapters in this survey, and it's really worth reading and it's free to read, it's on the internet, on the Center for Policy Research's website, is essentially dealing with how do you see each other and how do you perceive the possibilities of peace, for example. So the questions were, do Pakistanis trust India and Bangladesh? Do Indians trust Bangladesh and Pakistan? Do Bangladeshis trust India and Pakistan? And then this one, which was, can India and Pakistan become friendly? And what the survey really found was that more than half of both the Indians and the Pakistanis said it was unlikely that the two countries could be friendly in the next decade. So they're talking about the foreseeable future. Interestingly, Bangladeshis were more optimistic. More Bangladeshis said it was likely to see India and Pakistan becoming friendly in the next decade. But that was, again, 45 to 40%. 45% said it was likely. With India, a huge chunk, more than 60% said it's unlikely that the two countries can be friends. In Pakistan, it was about 45% or more, 55% or so who said the same thing. The first thing, Marvi, one has to look at is, firstly, this was 2022, although I think if the survey was done today, it may even be larger numbers saying that it's unlikely that the two will be friends, because nothing has happened in these last 2 years to give anyone any kind of hope. So the first factor when you ask why you think people have this kind of pessimism is that is the reality. I don't think we have seen a situation in our short history of 75 years and more where India and Pakistan have such little engagement with each other. And by that, I don't just mean that the two governments are not speaking to each other, that there have been no high-level interactions between the two sides since 2016. That's 8 years. It's nearly a decade. Since 2014, there's been no SAARC summit. So no subcontinental level leadership meetings, either a few things on Zoom, but not much more than that. So no discussions at the ministerial level. Since the 2008 Mumbai attacks, there's been no resumption of the composite bilateral dialogue, as it was called, although there was a period in there in 2015 when Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj went to Islamabad, where she discussed the restart of something called the composite bilateral dialogue between the two countries. And they just started to move towards a kind of reopening of ties between them when Prime Minister Modi landed in Lahore in the winter and on Christmas Day of 2015. But all of that came to an end in 2016. There was the Pathankot attacks, a couple of other attacks, and then the Uri attack in September of 2016, when I think between 20-25 soldiers were killed in that attack, very close to the line of control between them. After which there's really been no attempt to have any kind of bilateral talks. The interesting thing is, in all of this, there was only one exception, which I always call the Kartarpur exception. Because here was a situation when in 2018, they were able to discuss opening this corridor for pilgrims to go from India to Pakistan. And then for the opening, they actually sent Indian ministers to Pakistan as well. But that has remained confined to Kartarpur. So while Kartarpur still continues to function and Indians and Pakistanis coordinate on that, we haven't actually seen it. So one big reason for this kind of pessimism is the reality is this. Forget the governments. There are really very few avenues where Indians and Pakistanis can actually cross over to each other's side. They can meet in other capitals, but there are no visas. There are no musical exchanges as there once were. There are no film stars moving back and forth. There are no films being seen in each other's countries. Legally, you don't have any kind of business going on between them after 2019. And the Indian side's moves on Jammu and Kashmir. There's been no trade allowed at all, although Pakistan did eventually make some exemptions for medical pharmaceutical products. So you have no trade between them. So there's no business, there's no people-to-people ties. Only people, I think, who have families may be getting visas, and even those are few and far between. There are none of the normal cultural exchanges between the two countries. And so as a result, as this goes year to year, we see a precedent has been set now. So there is a sense that it'll be very difficult to now roll back an entire decade and more of this kind of situation. I think the third reason is that the governments themselves are not interested in opening this up. Particularly in India, I can say that any government, given what's happened in the past, which is that any kind of opening on ties, big ones like, say, the Lahore bus, or 2008 when they were discussing the Kashmir peace proposal, or Mr. Modi's visit to Lahore, followed by the Pathankot attack, and so many other things. There is a sense in India that, frankly, whenever you open ties with Pakistan, something big blows up, something goes wrong. So there's a risk averseness amongst the entire polity in India towards trying to tackle this. It's like it's just not worth it. What's the point? There'll be another attack. At least this way, we're avoiding those big attacks. And I think finally, there is the idea that if the governments don't want it, the average citizen is not going to feel that they can actually work across the board. And I'll say this because this survey comes a decade after, if you remember, Aman Ki Asha. There was a project between two big media groups, the Jung Group in Pakistan and the Times of India Group in India, ran between 2010 to 2013 or so. And they tried to do different initiatives to try and get a better understanding between the two countries. And in 2013, they had done a survey in which they had found a whopping 2/3 of Indians and Pakistanis saying, yes, we think peace is achievable in our lifetime. So that is what they felt a decade ago. And today, as you can see, the numbers show that They certainly don't think it's happening anytime soon. So I think these are some of the reasons why I can tell that there is such pessimism. As I said, what was interesting is those who are a little further away don't think the problems are so difficult to surmount. Like what Bangladesh says, no, actually, they can be friends.
Or maybe now, if we ask, because this was done in 2022 and things have changed in Bangladesh ever since as well. But you see, and frankly, Suhasini, I think, the status quo is still better, even if it is status quo. We have come to this, that even the status quo feels better than, for example, anything, God forbid, like 2008 or Uri or Pathankot or all these gory events. It's always better if India keeps ignoring us, and if Pakistan keeps engrossed in its own economic and various other problems, instead of looking at each other with hostility. Also, I think the mere fact that this survey happened, and a think tank from India and a polling group from India could talk to people in Pakistan, could gather their opinions about these issues. I think it's I feel quite good about it, despite the pessimism that people have expressed. But historically, we have seen cycles of hope and despair in India and Pakistan relations. How do you think that the current geopolitical landscape differs from the past periods of tension and attempted reconciliation?
Well, I do think things are different. I think there is a concerted effort on both sides to damp down any kind of engagement between the two countries. Even things like literature festivals, even small things like journalist exchanges are, we see the kind of reportage that happens by other media of these events as if it is something negative. I do think those come from the establishments in both countries. I really think that if anyone could, if the establishments in both countries just kept a neutral sort of attitude towards India-Pakistan exchanges, then you would probably see people coming together in a much more organic way, in whatever possible ways they could, in wherever they could try to meet and all the rest of that. The fact that they've not been able to in the last few years, I think is very much the establishments on both sides are kind of the unseen force behind it, where visas are not given, engagement is discouraged. Any kind of engagement is scrutinized so closely. Who is going to this conference? Why are you inviting so-and-so? So that is this is the kind of sociological kind of framework that we're seeing now, where society-wise, the lack of trust is beginning to show a difference. I think there's another part to it as well. And, as you've probably seen, you're now in the United States, Indians and Pakistanis meet in every part of the world and actually are able to get on. And actually, the political differences don't seem as important when they meet in other places. But the truth is that we are living in an era of populism, which both countries have been through, and an era of hyper-nationalism. A full decade, I think, that we have seen in both Pakistan and in India and in so many countries around the world, which is fueling the idea that actually it's, that there's no way that any other country can be right. It is only my country that can be right. So this has been internalized. And I see it very much as well when, sometimes I'm on a Pakistani channel as well, in the kind of questions I get asked or the very aggressive tone that is taken. And you've probably seen it on Indian channels as well, is this idea that somehow it is okay to otherize whoever is across the border. That's the second. The third is, and I genuinely say this, Marvi, not just, as a rhetorical point. I genuinely think in India after 2008, and I'm going back to that attack simply because that changed something inside India. After the Mumbai attacks of 2008, the kind of sentiment within India was very much nothing is worth this. Nothing is worth going through this. So if we have to forego ties with Pakistan, even if most people felt that it was, that it wasn't the whole country, that most people held the establishments responsible for allowing these terror groups to be active over there. Whatever it was, the mood kind of made a very, very decided shift after that attack. And I think there's been very little done to try and heal those wounds in terms of a process, in terms of a legal process. Even though, what I found amazing after the 2008 attacks is that it was in Pakistan that a lot of the inquiry and a lot of the investigations were actually done into that attack. And you're going to be asking, and your viewers are going to ask me, why are you going into such old history? Because we're talking 16 years ago. Is because I thought that there was a moment there where both countries could have, sort of found a way to deal with this common problem in a sense. I mean, Pakistan has been a victim of terror. And so many terrible terror attacks in all these years. But we didn't see that coming from the Pakistani establishment at the time. And as a result, that opportunity has, in a sense, been lost. So now there isn't that kind of, shall I say, capacity to absorb these events. As you said, there's a kind of better to not have to deal with these events than to have the highs and lows. But there's something else that we're losing out on as a result. We're losing out on the normal discourse between any two neighboring countries, the possibilities of trade between us, the possibilities of opening up markets between us. I often say, okay, then don't do it for the sake of the two countries, but at least do it for the sake of the region, because the region definitely suffers. Every other region of the world is now coming closer to their own regional neighbors, especially after the COVID pandemic. If you look around the world, there's a certain negativity attached with globalization. So during the COVID pandemic, what we did see was countries did not want outsiders, and there was a lot of blame on globalization for allowing this pandemic to go around the world. They're not turning completely only towards themselves. As a result, what we're seeing is the EU has come closer. Britain may have moved away, but the European Union is even more closely engaged with each other. South America has Mercosur. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement has opened the way for a lot of smaller African regionalism. They are working much closer with each other in these sub-regions. We see it in North America. We see it in the Gulf. We see it in Eurasia. We see it in ASEAN countries. We see it in RCEP, the larger part of that region. In all of this, there's only one region that has really left itself out by not coming together, and that is the South Asian region. And finally, the point I really want to often make is that forget even doing this for the present, but think about the future. Every challenge of the future, which we know is coming, whether it is climate change, whether it is the terrible pollution that all our countries are struggling with, whether it is joblessness, energy security, food security, agricultural security of all kinds. The fact is that the solutions to these problems are often found in regional solutions. So for example, if you want to deal with air pollution, and I know Lahore is always complaining about air pollution in the winter, so is Delhi. And sometimes we blame each other for the air pollution, but the actual fact is it has been proven again and again that when you work as an airshed, as a common airshed, and do airshed management for the entire region, you are more likely to be able to clean the pollution. Otherwise, the pollution will just go between one part of the region and the other. And that is how they were able to clean the skies, say, over the Nordic countries, or they were able to deal with air pollution in China as well as other regions of the world. So your solutions, and I can go into, talking about how other things also will see better if you have a common market, or you are a common consumer profile you can put on energy, if you can become a kind of labor cartel, because all our South Asian countries have labor that is going abroad that requires to get good labor standards, get paid better without having to compete with each other. So in all of these respects, if your solutions are actually going to be found in regional solutions, then at least for that, for the future, there should be a way of finding a way to engage with each other. After all, India and Pakistan do engage with each other, but they engage with each other in places like the SCO, which we have really not that much in common with. If you look at the Central Asian region, China, Russia, and all the rest of that. But there we are able to go to a conference together, but in South Asia itself, we're not able to. So there are a lot of contradictions involved in all of this. If you look at the government right now in India as well, we have a very serious situation with China. Eyeball to eyeball, army mobilization on both sides of the line of actual control between India and China. Indians believe that Chinese soldiers have occupied large tracts of Indian land. And yet, we continue trade with them. In fact, we continue to talk about the military situation with China, but we will not do it with Pakistan, except for perhaps that one ceasefire at the LOC that was negotiated a few years ago.
Yeah, and even that is now the Kashmir trade has not been happening for quite some years, especially I think after 2019. There are no two arguments about what you are saying. I mean, there needs to be
There are
individual.
lots of people who would disagree. It's just
Yeah, a
on
lot
both
of people would disagree. Yeah, absolutely. In my view, there shouldn't be any disagreement on peace between. There's a need of peace in South Asian, in South Asian region, and South Asian region is mostly influenced by the conflict between India and Pakistan. It's a, most persistent kind of a conflict. And as I hear in your narrative also that the constituency of peace has shrunken to a great extent. In 2000, we are talking about 2008, and I remember I was in Islamabad at that time, and I remember a bunch of us had organized a vigil for the victims and survivors of 2008 terrorist attacks from in Islamabad. And there was, slight coverage of it as well in Pakistani media. But now I cannot think of doing, I mean, being in Islamabad, being in Pakistan, anywhere in Pakistan, and organizing a vigil for India's, victims, I don't think it's possible anymore. And so we have deteriorated to a great extent. There have been entrenched political positions on both sides, but given those positions, do you see any potential avenues for further confidence building measures in the near future?
Well, I think firstly we have to turn to a more realistic lens. After all, if all those contradictions I just spoke about are actually something that cannot be explained, then the first thing we must understand is to completely deny engagement between the two countries is illogical. It is a non-realpolitik. It is actually ideological to say I can have no conversation with Pakistan, but I can have a conversation with China, for example, or I can never speak to Pakistan on in either of our countries, but I will go to the SCO and take part in a conference along with the Pakistani leadership. So I think first thing is to understand that there has to be a realistic assessment of whether engagement is possible between the two countries or not. I think the second is, Marvi, and don't mind my saying that, but we have to do away with the idea that we are looking at a constituency for peace anymore. It may not even be peace. It may just be an engagement between the two, a dialogue between the two, one in which we may not feel peace, but at least we can work towards the absence of violence. That is the first step between us. And I think, when I heard External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar say just last week that the era of uninterrupted dialogue with Pakistan is over.
Yes,
I
I
also heard the subtext in which he said we will deal with developments, whether they're positive or negative, in a proactive way. We will be reactive. We will not be passive. I think what he was perhaps not even trying to say, maybe said it subconsciously, is that the door is never completely closed between the two countries. And whenever India and Pakistan have begun engagement again, it has always been a surprise to the people on both sides. It has always come out of the blue, and it has always been triggered by something, or by a meeting somewhere, or a change in government on one side. So there's always that expectations. You asked about what are the confidence building measures we could work on. I don't think we should just do away with words for the moment, like confidence, trust, peace, because those are still a far cry for the state of relations that our two countries have come down to in this past decade. I think what we should work on is what is doable. To begin with, there's some very, very low-hanging fruit. Since 2019, we have not allowed the Wagah border to really operate, and the LOC Kashmir trade crossings as well. I think a start could be made there. I certainly heard some comments being made by the new Pakistan foreign minister and commerce ministers, who said that tradesmen and businessmen had also asked about the possibility of opening that. That's certainly one way of just restoring 2019 levels of what we had. Send the high commissioners back on both sides, so you have fully operational high commissions on both sides. And then not necessarily work on the idea of a summit right at the top, because we've seen what the pattern with these summits is. Too much political capital has to be put in by the leaders. And as I said, most people are now risk averse. So they may not want to put in that political capital anymore. But to build a system of dialogue that can work at a much lower level, in a way, perhaps like the ceasefire between the two countries was negotiated in 2021, quietly, away from the glare of the cameras. A suggestion had often been that don't have Pakistani delegations come to Delhi or Indian delegations go to Islamabad. Let them meet at a kind of makeshift cabin somewhere on Wagah Atari line. And meet over there and leave. We've had that kind of conversation in the past, I think, when it came to border security forces. When in the days when they used to have a dialogue, they used to be able to meet somewhere along the Wagah Atari border and then go back to their own country. So it wasn't really as much about coming to each other's countries as it was the substance of the talks was somehow more important than the optics and all the hype that goes with it, which we know often goes awry, because one word said wrongly, one side or the other always becomes an issue. And then work towards what is the end game between the two countries. I think if there was a period between 2003 and 2008 where we realistically saw a chance even for peace, it was because whether it was Prime Minister Vajpayee or whether it was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on the Indian side, and there was General Musharraf followed by Asif Ali Zardari, I think on that side, there was a genuine view to what is the final end game that we are looking at. And the end game was one of a kind of friendship between the two countries, and they'd even worked on a friendship treaty between the two countries at the time. And I don't think that can happen immediately, but I don't think it's completely impossible in the next few decades at least.
I really hope so. I was reading a very interesting comment by Ramchandra Guha the other day, and he was quoted as saying that instead of trying to be Vishwa Guru, India should better try to be Vishwa Mitra, which was like a very interesting comment. How much do you believe that the current leadership in India influences the public opinion, and especially pessimism about the bilateral relationship between Pakistan and India? Has the recent election made the BJP leadership, tweak its posture on bilateral dialogue?
Well, certainly what we have seen as a result of the most recent election, where the BJP lost its majority in parliament, although they still formed a government along with coalition allies, what we've certainly seen is a softening of the government on many issues. For example, you may be following some of the politics in India, but on certain laws that they wanted to pass, instead of just trying to push them through with a kind of brute majority, instead now we see more engagement, more discussion, more all-party meetings, discussions and debates inside parliament, where we didn't really see too much of that in the past. Now, when it comes to the neighbors, I think there is a little more pragmatism. For example, with the Maldives, before the elections, there was practically a kind of, standoff between the two, because the new president in the Maldives had come to power on the back of an India Out campaign. He was very adamant that Indian military personnel must leave the islands. And India was able to work out a compromise by which we sent personnel, but they were not military personnel. And that has all, happened in the last couple of months. What we're seeing is, the External Affairs Minister going to Maldives and trying to say, let bygones be bygones. We've seen a certain softening on other issues as well, where the government has taken a more pragmatic look. On Pakistan, we haven't seen that yet. And frankly, I think many had sort of assumed that with a new government in Pakistan from January and a new government in India, or a government with a new mandate in India from June, that we would have seen some kind of a movement between the two. Maybe that has become a casualty of the fact that the BJP did not win a full majority, because it makes it difficult to take big steps in any direction, in a positive or a negative direction. You become a little more cautious about the kind of big moves that you are able to do. Thirdly, I think for India right now, if there is a larger concern, it is not Pakistan, but China. And somehow resolving the line of actual control situation with China, which has meant the movement of so many more troops to the border, so many more resources being put in on the border with China. And I think that that has overtaken, in a sense, the idea of what might happen with Pakistan. Although, as I said, there were many who thought that there would be some kind of a détente, that there have been opportunities. There was the SCO in Kazakhstan, but then Prime Minister Modi didn't go for that. There is the possibility of an SCO heads of government meeting in Islamabad on October 15 to 16, where the Pakistani government has invited Prime Minister Modi. Now, I just for viewers who might think that heads of government means that Prime Minister Modi would attend, since 2017, when India and Pakistan joined the SCO, the leaders on both sides, in those days it was Prime Minister Imran Khan and Prime Minister Modi, had decided that they would attend the heads of summit meetings, not the heads of government meeting, and depute the vice president or the external affairs minister, the heads of government meeting. This is because if you look at the other countries in the SCO, like Russia, China, Central Asia, Iran, and all the rest, it's a presidential system. So Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi would go to the heads of heads of state summit rather than the heads of government. So the first thing would be, maybe Prime Minister Modi would never in any case go for a heads of government visit. But now that Pakistan has done the invitation, it will be very interesting to see, will India even a ministerial level? Because again, the question will be asked, if you have not sent a ministerial level representative for SAARC in all these years, but now are willing to send one for the SCO, that will certainly be a precedent, and it will be important to watch. If India decides not to take up that opportunity, then there will be other repercussions, simply because the SCO itself is a close-knit group. They expect a certain amount of engagement from each country. And India not attending an SCO, such a senior level meeting, may have its own impact on India's position in the grouping. So I think no matter what happens there, that will be worth watching. And I think further down the line, there are always, as we know from the past in India and Pakistan ties, when there have been big breaks in the ties, there are always many opportunities. There's the United Nations, there's the BRICS summit, where there may be special invitees coming in from other places. There'll be the SCO next year in China, the heads of state summit. There will be other opportunities for the two sides to meet. But at the end of the day, it would have to come on the backs, as I said, of a few things that, at least if nothing else, are able to put back some of the pieces that were broken a few years ago, and take you back perhaps to the 2019 situation. I think let's see what is the reaction also to the elections in Jammu and Kashmir, because Pakistan had said at in 2019, that they'd like to see a reversal of the steps in that would take 2019. And that may not be so much about 370, the Article 370, because Pakistan, to be fair, has never accepted Article 370. So to care about India diluting it is actually would be something new. But if India is able to, if the Modi government is able to hold elections in Jammu and Kashmir, they go off successfully, you have a government formed, the Prime Minister and the Home Minister have both promised that the next step will be the restoration of statehood to Jammu and Kashmir. Then it may be in some way worked as a sort of reversal. So I think we'll have to wait and watch with a lot of caution and frankly, a lot of, and squashing any kind of real hope or optimism, have a more realistic approach.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to end it, that let's hope, but let's be realistic as well. So thank you very much, Suhasini. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Marvi. Thanks for having me on, and may this conversation at least continue.
Absolutely. Let's continue, and we will keep bothering you intermittently. Thank you very much.